What kind of husband files for divorce without saying a word, after watching his wife laugh at his humiliation? I thought it was harmless fun when my ex mocked him in front of our friends. Everyone laughed, even me. But when the laughter stopped, he started planning something far quieter and far more permanent. People always said Ethan was the kind of man every woman wanted to marry. Steady job, no drama, dependable to the point of boredom. I used to think that was true. For years, I convinced myself that reliability was love. But somewhere between school pickups and dinner routines, his calm started to feel like silence, and his silence felt like judgment. He didn't shout, didn't flirt, didn't lose control. He just existed beside me, neat and careful, like a man who didn't need anyone. I wanted to feel wanted. Then Julian came back. My ex from college, funny, charming, the type who filled every room. When he walked in, people listened. When he joked, people laughed, including me. He was everything Ethan wasn't, unfiltered, alive. He'd always said I was the kind of woman who needed an audience. Maybe he was right. When I told Ethan that Julian had joined our firm as a consultant, he just nodded and said he hoped it wouldn't be distracting. I rolled my eyes. He made everything sound so small, so unimportant. I told him he needed to relax, that we were adults. He said nothing, just gave me that calm look that always made me feel like the guilty one. At first, it was harmless. Julian would tease me during meetings, calling me the sharpest one in the room. He'd make jokes about how Ethan was too serious for someone like you. My colleagues laughed. I laughed too. It felt good, like breathing after years of holding it in. Ethan hated those dinners, the ones with my work friends and Julian's loud stories. He'd sit quietly, smiling in the right places, but I could feel the tension in him. I thought he was embarrassed because Julian outshone him. I didn't realize he was watching, really watching everything. The night it happened, I didn't plan to humiliate him. It just happened too easily. Julian made another joke about Ethan being the accountant of love, and everyone laughed. I laughed too, louder than I should have. When I looked at Ethan, he wasn't angry. He just looked tired. That was worse somehow. He didn't argue when we got home. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said quietly, "Every joke has a cost. You'll see what yours was." I thought he meant I'd made him look bad. I didn't know he was warning me. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The dinner that night was supposed to be a celebration. My promotion, my moment. I had picked the restaurant myself, something bright and crowded, the kind of place where laughter echoed off every wall. Ethan didn't want to go, of course. He said he preferred quiet dinners, just the two of us, but I told him that was selfish. "People want to see us together," I said. He just nodded, as if agreeing with something he didn't believe in. When we arrived, Julian was already there, surrounded by half my team. He stood up, arms wide, that same grin that used to make me feel like the world revolved around me. He hugged me a little too long, and I laughed, pretending not to notice Ethan's jaw tighten. I introduced them again, even though they'd met before. "You remember my husband Ethan?" I said. Julian smirked and said, "Of course, the famous husband who never smiles." Everyone laughed. I did too, even though Ethan's eyes didn't move from his glass. The night went on like that, Julian telling stories about our college days, our old inside jokes, little things I hadn't thought about in years. My co-workers found it hilarious. Ethan sat quietly beside me, answering politely when spoken to, but mostly just watching. I told myself he was being uptight. I told myself he was embarrassed because he couldn't keep up with Julian's energy. At one point, Julian leaned forward and said, "Livia always liked men who could make her laugh. Didn't you?" He was smiling when he said it, but there was an edge underneath. I laughed again, trying to keep things light. Everyone likes a good laugh, I said. Ethan didn't respond. He just looked at me with that calm, unreadable face. Dessert came, and the jokes kept getting meaner. Someone asked how long we'd been married, and Julian said, long enough for her to get bored. I laughed louder than anyone else. It was instinct, I think, a way to pretend it didn't sting. But I saw Ethan's hand go still on the table. He looked at Julian, not angrily, just directly, and said, "Do you enjoy disrespecting other people's families, or is this a new hobby?" The table went quiet. Even Julian froze for a second before forcing a laugh. "Relax, man, it's just a joke." Ethan pushed his chair back and said calmly, "I know." Then he stood, placed a few bills on the table, and said to me, "You can stay if you like." I should have gone with him, but I didn't. I stayed. I told myself he was being dramatic, that leaving like that made him look weak. So when Julian said, "Guess he doesn't like competition," I smiled, and when the others started whispering, I laughed again. After the dinner, I went home expecting a fight. I was ready to defend myself, ready to tell him he'd embarrassed me by storming out. But the house was quiet when I walked in. He was sitting on the couch, tie loosened, TV off. "I didn't storm out," he said, before I could speak. "I left to stop you from saying something you'd regret." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, please, you're overreacting. It was a joke." He nodded slowly. "Yes, and every joke has a cost. You'll see what yours was." I tried to argue, but he stood and went upstairs. No shouting, no slamming doors, just silence, the kind that makes you feel small. Later that night, I told Clara about it over the phone. She laughed and said, "He's just jealous. Men like him can't handle confident women." I believed her because it was easier. The next morning, Ethan was gone before I woke up. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter that said only, "Have a good day." Dinner was interesting, nothing else. No affection, no anger, just that strange, deliberate calm. At work, everyone was still talking about how wild the dinner had been. Julian stopped by my desk and said, "You were the star last night." I almost felt bad for him. I smiled and told him not to. Inside, I felt something else, something uneasy. But I buried it. That evening, when I got home, Ethan was in his study. He didn't look up when I said hello. "Busy day?" I asked. He said, "Productive." His voice was steady, but there was something in the way he said it that made my stomach twist. When I went to pour a glass of wine, I noticed a stack of folders on his desk, neatly labeled with dates. I asked what they were. He said, "Just organizing." I didn't think much of it then. But later, lying in bed, I realized he hadn't kissed me goodnight. He hadn't even said goodnight. And for some reason, that silence felt heavier than any argument ever could. Over the next few days, Ethan's silence started to feel like a wall. He didn't mention the dinner, didn't bring up Julian, didn't even look at me for more than a few seconds at a time. He still did everything the same, made coffee, left for work at 7, came home at 6, but it felt like he was rehearsing a routine for an audience that no longer existed. I wanted him to argue. I wanted him to react. Instead, he just lived like I wasn't there. So I made a performance of moving on. At the office, I told my coworkers how tense Ethan had been lately, how he couldn't take a joke. They laughed, shaking their heads like I was a martyr for surviving such a serious man. Julian, of course, joined in, smirking as he said, "He's just intimidated." I pretended to agree, though deep down, something about that word, intimidated, didn't fit. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who felt small. He was the kind who waited. I told Clara what had happened, hoping she'd say something comforting. She said, "You have to remind him who you are. He's lucky you even stayed with him. Men like Ethan think calm is power, but it's just fear." I repeated that line later at work like it was mine. It sounded smart, justified, even though it was built on nothing. That weekend, Ethan suggested we visit his mother for dinner. I didn't want to go, but saying no would have looked defensive. When we got there, Martha greeted him warmly, but barely looked at me. She cooked like she always did, perfectly, quietly. Halfway through the meal, she asked me how work was going. I told her everything was fine. She nodded, then said, "I heard about that dinner." I froze, forcing a smile. "Oh, you know how people exaggerate." She didn't smile back. "They said your friend made jokes about Ethan in front of everyone." "It was harmless," I said quickly. "Just office humor." Her tone stayed calm. "I'm sure it felt harmless until you realized who was laughing." I tried to change the subject, but Ethan didn't help. He just kept eating, silent as ever. When we got home, I asked why he didn't defend me. He said, "You didn't defend me either." Then he went upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my unfinished glass of wine. The next morning, I noticed he had changed his phone password. He'd never had one before. When I asked, he said he was reorganizing his work files. I told him that made me uncomfortable. He replied, "You don't like it when people hide things." The words stung more than they should have. At work, Julian kept dropping by my office. "You two make such a strange pair," he said once, leaning against my desk. "He's so quiet and well, you're alive." I laughed because that's what everyone expected me to do. But that evening, I replayed his words on the drive home. They didn't feel like compliments anymore. That night, Ethan was already in bed when I came in. I tried to start a conversation, telling him about a new campaign I was managing. He listened, eyes fixed on the ceiling. When I finished, he said, "Do you ever think about what people say when you're not in the room?" I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He turned his head slightly, meeting my eyes for the first time in days. "You think they laugh because you're funny. They laugh because it's easy." I wanted to argue, but the word stuck. Instead, I said, "At least I make people feel something." He nodded slowly. "You do." Then he turned off the light. The following day, I came home early from work. Ethan wasn't there. His study door was closed, but the light was on. I went in and saw the desk covered with organized stacks of paper, bank statements, printed screenshots, even copies of my social media posts. One folder was labeled Dinner, 14 March. Another said Public Comments. I felt a rush of heat. When he came home, I confronted him. "Are you collecting things on me?" I demanded. He looked at the desk, then at me. "I'm collecting facts." "For what?" He shrugged. "For clarity." I laughed nervously. "You sound like you're planning a trial." He said quietly, "Truth usually ends up in one." I told him he was being dramatic. He said nothing. That night, I called Clara again, venting about how paranoid he'd become. She told me to stop overthinking, that Ethan was bluffing. He wouldn't know how to fight dirty even if he wanted to, she said. But as I watched him from across the dinner table, calm and silent while I picked at my food, I realized she was wrong. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't angry either. He was something worse, methodical. And for the first time, I couldn't tell what he was building. When I went to bed, he was still downstairs. I heard the faint hum of the printer. I didn't ask what he was printing. I didn't need to. Whatever it was, it already had my name on it. The next week, everything began to shift. Ethan didn't act angry or distant anymore. He acted polite. That was somehow worse. He said good morning, asked about my day, even made dinner twice as if nothing had happened. But it wasn't kindness. It was precision. Every word, every movement felt rehearsed, calculated. I started to feel like a guest in my own marriage. At work, Julian noticed immediately. "Trouble in paradise?" he joked. I told him not to be ridiculous, but he smirked and said, "Come on, I can tell. He doesn't get you. He never did." I laughed like it was funny, even though part of me wanted to believe it was true. That night, I came home later than usual. Ethan was in his study again, the door half closed. He looked up when I walked in and said, "Long day?" His tone was perfectly neutral. I said, "Just meetings." He nodded. I'm glad you're working hard. It'll make the next part easier. I asked what he meant. He said, "You'll see." I told myself I was imagining things, but unease followed me everywhere. I started checking his phone whenever he left it on the counter. Nothing. No messages, no calls, nothing suspicious. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he was 2 steps ahead. One afternoon, Julian suggested we all go out again. Like the old days, he said. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We planned a small dinner with my co-workers, and I invited Ethan, thinking it would show everyone things were fine. He accepted immediately, which surprised me. That Friday night, we met at a rooftop bar downtown. The air was warm, lights strung overhead, laughter floating everywhere. Julian greeted me with a hug that lingered just a moment too long. Ethan stood beside me, shaking Julian's hand without smiling. "Good to see you," Julian said, his tone smug. Ethan replied, "I'm sure." The evening started smoothly enough. Jokes, wine, stories. I tried to keep the focus off old memories, but Julian wouldn't let it go. He teased me about our college years, about how fun Livia used to be before she became someone's wife. The table laughed. I did too, though my laugh sounded hollow even to me. Ethan said nothing. Then Julian looked at Ethan and said, "Man, I don't know how you do it. Being married to someone who lights up a room must be exhausting." The table erupted in laughter again. I caught Ethan's face in the glow of the overhead lights. Calm. Still. But his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. "Not exhausting," he said softly. "Just educational." Julian blinked. "Meaning what?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You'll understand eventually." No one knew what to say after that. The laughter died, and for the first time, Julian looked uneasy. When we got home, I expected a fight. I rehearsed my arguments in my head, how it was all harmless, how he was overreacting again. But Ethan didn't mention it. He took off his jacket, hung it neatly, and went upstairs. I followed him, angry that he wouldn't even engage. "Why are you acting like a stranger?" I asked. He said, "Because I'm learning how to stop being your audience." I froze. "You're making this bigger than it is." "No," he said, "you are." The next morning, he was gone again before sunrise. A note on the counter read, "Meeting with my attorney. Back later." My stomach turned. I told myself it was just work-related, that I was paranoid, but the handwriting was too deliberate, too clean. When I called Clara, she said I was being dramatic. "He's bluffing," she repeated. "Men like him don't actually go through with things. They just want to scare you." That afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. "There's been some talk," he said. "Apparently someone sent screenshots from your personal account, jokes about Ethan, the dinner, that kind of thing. It doesn't look good for the company." I felt my face burn. "Who would do that?" He shrugged. "Anonymous email, but whoever it was had access to your contacts, your posts, even deleted messages." When I got home, Ethan was waiting at the table. "Rough day?" he asked, voice calm. I stared at him. "Did you do this?" He tilted his head. "Do what?" "Send my posts around? Humiliate me?" He looked me straight in the eye. "You did that part yourself. I just made sure the right people saw it." My breath caught. "You're trying to destroy me." He stood slowly, gathering his files. "No, Livia, I'm just telling the truth. You're the one who turned it into entertainment." He walked past me toward the door. Before leaving, he said, "We both know how much you love an audience. Don't lose them now." When the door closed, I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the echo of my own laughter from a week ago. It was the first time I realized how terrifying silence could be. The silence between us became its own kind of war. Ethan didn't argue, didn't accuse, didn't even raise his voice. He simply went about his life like I wasn't part of it anymore. He ate breakfast at a different time, took his calls outside, and kept his documents locked away. The house looked the same. but something inside it had shifted, like a door I couldn't open no matter how hard I knocked. At first, I tried to fight back the only way I knew how, pretending I didn't care. I laughed louder at work, posted cheerful updates, tagged photos with captions like "stronger than ever." People commented with hearts and fire emojis, and I told myself that meant I was winning. But every night, when I came home to that quiet house and saw his calm face, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like waiting for something to fall apart. Martha called me one afternoon. She never wasted time on small talk. "I heard things are difficult," she said. I told her it was just a misunderstanding, that Ethan was being distant. She said, "He's not being distant. He's building distance. There's a difference." I tried to brush it off, but her words stuck with me. Later that week, Ethan suggested a family dinner. I thought it was progress, maybe his way of softening. I even dressed up a little. But when I came downstairs, I saw his laptop open on the table, folders neatly arranged beside 2 plates. He'd invited me to dinner, but it wasn't about food. "I thought we could talk," he said. His tone was gentle, but there was no warmth. I sat down, pretending to be confident. "Finally, I was starting to think you forgot how." He opened one of the folders and slid a paper toward me. "This is a summary of our shared accounts," he said. "I've already moved my salary and savings into a separate account." I stared at the paper. "You're separating finances without even telling me?" He nodded. "I'm informing you now." I laughed, sharp and defensive. "You can't just—" He cut me off. "Livia, I'm not asking permission." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even trying to argue. He was simply done. "You're making a mistake," I said finally. "People will think you're overreacting." He met my eyes. "People already know who you are. I'm just making sure I do too." I slammed the paper down and walked out, but my hands were shaking. That night, Clara came over with a bottle of wine. I told her everything, hoping she'd tell me I was right again, that I still had control. She poured herself a glass, then said quietly, "You should stop posting about him. People are starting to talk." "What people?" I demanded. She hesitated. "Everyone, Liv. Some of your co-workers, even my friends. They think you're trying too hard to look unbothered." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "So now I'm supposed to look sad?" She didn't answer. 2 days later, I came home early and found him sitting with a man in a suit, his lawyer. They were reviewing something on the dining table. When I walked in, the man stood politely and introduced himself. "We're finalizing some documents," he said. Ethan didn't look up. "What documents?" I asked. He replied simply, "Legal ones." The lawyer excused himself soon after, and I followed Ethan into the hallway. "You can't be serious," I said. He turned to me, calm as ever. "I'm serious about everything I do." "So this is your revenge, papers and lawyers?" "It's not revenge," he said. "It's order." I laughed, though it sounded more like a choke. "You think you can just erase me?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "You already erased yourself. I'm just making it official." That night, I found a plain envelope on my pillow. Inside was a letter, notice of petition for divorce. There was no note, no explanation, only his signature at the bottom. I stood there staring at it, feeling the air drain from the room. I went to Clara's again, waving the papers like proof of betrayal. She looked at them, then at me. "He warned you," she said softly. I told her she didn't understand. "It was just laughter," I said. "Just one night." She sighed. "It's never just one night when someone decides they're done." When I got back home, Ethan was asleep on the couch, papers stacked neatly beside him. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I stood there for a long time, watching him, waiting for him to wake up so I could start another argument, something to pull us back into life. But he didn't stir. He just breathed slowly, evenly, like a man who'd already left without moving an inch. And that's when I realized the truth. I hadn't just humiliated him in front of everyone. I'd made him disappear from me long before he decided to leave. The mediation day came faster than I expected. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, and when I looked in the mirror that morning, I barely recognized myself. Grace offered to come, but I told her no. This wasn't about support, it was about control, and I refused to look weak. Ethan, of course, arrived early. He was wearing the same navy suit he always wore for serious things. Quiet, precise, impossible to read. His lawyer was beside him, all calm professionalism. I had mine too, but she looked nervous before we even began. We sat across from each other in that cold office, the sound of pens and paper echoing like footsteps in an empty hall. The mediator started with introductions, her voice steady, kind, detached. Then she said, "We're here to finalize the division of assets, custody of the minor, and any pending disputes." She said it like she was reading a recipe. I tried to speak first. "This doesn't have to be hostile," I said. "We can fix this without making a scene." Ethan didn't even look at me. His lawyer replied, "Mr. Hart has no intention of hostility. He just wants clarity." That word again, clarity. It made me feel small, like I was being studied under a microscope. The mediator began with the finances. Ethan had detailed spreadsheets, accounts, statements, transactions, all printed, highlighted, categorized. My lawyer whispered, "He's thorough." I whispered back, "He's obsessive." But the more he explained, the more I realized he had thought through every possible argument. When it came to property, Ethan was calm. "The house is under joint ownership, but the mortgage is paid from my salary. I'm requesting it remain for stability until Hannah is grown." My lawyer objected, saying it was unfair. Ethan said, "It's not about fairness, it's about responsibility." Then came custody. The mediator read from another document, witness statements, screenshots, photos, my laughter, my jokes, my posts. I hadn't realized how much of my own life I'd handed him on a silver platter. There were comments from colleagues, one saying, "She made her husband the punchline of every story." Another from Julian, bragging about how some men can't handle confident women. The mediator looked at me. "Do you dispute any of these?" I said, "They were jokes. Everyone knew that." Ethan said quietly, "So did I." My lawyer tried to shift the focus, talking about my work schedule, my involvement in Hannah's school activities. Ethan listened politely, never interrupting. Then, when it was his turn, he simply said, "I'm not taking her mother away. I'm just making sure she knows what respect looks like." His calm was unbearable. I wanted him to shout, to show even a trace of pain, but he wouldn't give me that satisfaction. I felt cornered by silence. The mediator asked if I had anything to add. I wanted to tell her how unfair this was, how I was being punished for laughing. But the words tangled. "He's making me the villain," I said instead. Ethan turned to me for the first time. "You made yourself the story," he said. "I'm just ending the chapter." The session went on for hours. Every time I thought it was over, another file appeared. There were even screenshots of private messages between me and Clara. Conversations I thought were harmless, filled with sarcasm about Ethan being too serious for real life. Somehow he had them all. When it ended, the mediator said, "Mr. Hart will retain the family home and primary custody. Mrs. Hart will receive partial settlement funds as agreed. Future communication will go through legal counsel." It didn't sound real, like someone else's life being summarized in clean, professional sentences. Outside, I tried to catch Ethan before he left. "You really think this makes you the good guy?" I asked. He paused by the door, hands in his pockets. "No," he said. "It just makes me free." I laughed, a sharp sound that didn't feel like mine. "You're proud of yourself then, ruining me." He looked at me for a long moment. "You ruined us. I'm just letting the world see it for what it is." Then he walked away. No anger, no backward glance, just quiet footsteps down the corridor. When I got home, the house felt colder than ever. His things were already gone. Only a few boxes remained, labeled, sealed, waiting for collection. On the counter, there was a small envelope. Inside was a note in his neat handwriting. "You laughed until it hurt. Now it's just quiet." I sat down at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The room felt hollow, like all the sound had been drained from it. For the first time, I understood what his calm had meant all along. It wasn't weakness, it was warning. And by the time I realized it, he had already won, without ever needing to raise his voice. The court date came like the final act of a play I hadn't agreed to be in. Everything about that morning felt too quiet. The sky grey, the city still, my phone buzzing with messages I didn't want to read. Clara came with me, but didn't say much. She'd stopped defending me weeks ago, only offering neutral words like, "You'll get through it." I hated how calm she sounded. I hated how much she sounded like him. Ethan was already there when we arrived, sitting with his lawyer. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He just adjusted his tie and handed another document to his attorney. He looked well-rested, sharp, peaceful. I wondered when he'd last lost sleep. Probably never. The judge went through everything as if reading a list of chores: divorce approval, asset division, child custody. Her voice was steady, the words short and final. Custody of the minor, Hannah Hart, to remain with the father. The mother will be granted supervised visitation upon court review. I stared at the floor, the words echoing inside my head, until they didn't sound like language anymore. My lawyer nudged me, whispering that it was done. Done. Such a small word for something so permanent. When it was over, Ethan stood, shook hands with his lawyer, and gathered his papers. I expected at least a glance, some flicker of emotion, but there was nothing. He might as well have been leaving a meeting about building permits. I followed him out of the courtroom. "You could have fought less dirty," I said, my voice trembling. He turned, calm as ever. "You made it public, Livia. I just used what was already out there." "That's manipulation," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "That's accountability." I wanted to slap him, to scream that he'd ruined me. But even in that hallway, surrounded by strangers, I could see that nothing I said would reach him. He had already buried me under paperwork, under truth. When he walked away, I called after him, "You'll regret this one day." He didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. Outside, cameras waited. Someone must have leaked the case details. A reporter asked if I was the woman from the dinner video. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my heels echoing on the courthouse steps, each sound reminding me that I'd built my own downfall, one laugh at a time. Back home, I opened the door to my now half-empty apartment. Boxes lined the walls, my name scribbled in marker on the sides. It looked more like a stranger's storage unit than a home. On the kitchen counter sat one last envelope. No address, no stamp, just my name in Ethan's handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed transcript of one of my old social posts. The caption read, "Marriage is just friendship with taxes, unless you find someone who can make you laugh." Below it, Ethan had written in pen, "You found your laughter. I found my freedom." I sank into a chair, the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't rage that came first. It was recognition. He hadn't punished me. He'd simply erased me. Every word I'd said, every joke I'd made, had been turned into evidence that I didn't deserve the life I once mocked. Clara came by that evening, her face pale when she saw the envelope. "He really went through with it," she said quietly. I nodded. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just finished it. She looked around the room, then asked, "What will you do now?" I laughed once, hollow and sharp. What I always do, pretend it's funny. But it wasn't. That night I sat in the empty living room, lights off, scrolling through old photos of us, dinners, vacations, birthdays. In every picture he looked the same, calm, steady, composed. And me, always laughing, always louder than everyone else. The last photo was from that restaurant, the night it all began. Julian in the background, Ethan beside me, quiet while I smiled at something cruel. I hadn't noticed back then how small he looked beside my laughter. Now it was all I could see. I closed my phone and let the silence fill the room. For the first time in years, there was no one left to hear me laugh. And that, I realized, was his final victory. He didn't need revenge. He just needed me to live in the quiet I'd spent so long mocking. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.